RugbyRenegade.com, the #1 online strength and conditioning program for rugby. Are you ready to get bigger, stronger, fitter, and faster and dominate your opposition? Welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast, where we build machines.
Hello and welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Pro Athlete Supplementation. Check them out at pas-nutrition.co.uk for all your supplementation needs. And don't forget that subscribers to the Rugby Renegade program get a 40% discount on retail prices. Yes, hello and welcome back to the 28th episode of the Rugby Renegade Podcast. My name's Jamie Bain and today I interview Marc Keys, an expert powerlifting and strength and conditioning coach with a lot of experience in rugby and other sports, the Scottish Institute of Sport, of course, working mainly with Edinburgh Rugby. And we talked to him all about strength and power development, and there's some real good take-home messages. So as always, give it a good listen and let us know what you think. Hi Marc, welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. Thanks for sharing your time with us. Why don't we start by you explaining a bit about your background, how you got into strength and conditioning and some of the teams you've worked with.
Cool. Well, my name's Marc Keys. I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I've been based out of Edinburgh pretty much for the entirety of my career. I'm also a powerlifter and a powerlifting coach. I run a business called Cast Iron Strength, through which we currently coach about 70 athletes. We're through a mixture of online and in-person training. Our main focus is powerlifting, however. For my strength and conditioning background, I did my undergraduate at University of Central Lancaster. I was there between 2004 to 2007. From there, I saved up to do my master's in Edinburgh University, did the MSc there, under Tony Turner and Mike Stone. During that year, I ended up doing shadowing with Neil Crosby at the Scottish Institute of Sport. From there, I got offered a contract with the Institute of Sport to coach their sessions in St. Leonard's. So I spent 4 years, I think it's 4 or 5, it's 2008 till 2013, coaching a mixture of individual athletes, team athletes, and so on through the Institute of Sport. We had a mixture with the likes of Callum Skinner, who came through, obviously went on to win 2 medals at the 2016 Games, a few other athletes who medalled at the Paralympics, Commonwealth Games, and a mixture of athletes who were like a development. So we dealt with the Scottish Rugby unions. At the time, they're kind of tier 2 athletes, so the athletes that were maybe in the back minds of coaches for a potential pro academy contract, but maybe were either too young or weren't quite there yet, or maybe we're just a little bit short of the selection criteria. So it was a real mixed bunch of athletes we dealt with there, but it was mainly gym-based training. I also worked with the University of Edinburgh, just doing more kind of general gym training, and that's kind of where my kind of gym specialty came from, because I just coached mainly powerlifters, strongmen, weightlifters, coached them for about 5 years out of the university, and I myself was also a competitive powerlifter, so that's kind of where my specialty kind of grew and developed. And then eventually, just through luck of, I was trying to get into professional rugby jobs for about 5 years, always getting knocked back, but eventually just through having a good reputation and word of mouth, I got an opportunity to help Edinburgh Rugby with the pre-season in the season of 2013 2015. 2013-2014, sorry, and through the back end of the 2 or 3 months helping with their gym, primarily helping with their gym program, I got offered a year contract with Edinburgh, and primarily as a strength coach, but also to help with the strength and conditioning side of things. From then, I spent 4 years at Edinburgh, mixed with the good thing about Edinburgh was it was quite a turbulent time for the club. So from my own development, from my standpoint, I got to work under a whole bunch of different lead coaches. I think in my time at Edinburgh, I got to assist maybe 5 or 6 lead SC coaches. So from my side of things, it was a great development, and that developed massively in my 4 years there. And basically just learned how I could maybe, the institute was maybe more of a pure SSC environment, as institutes tend to be, very, like, incredibly numbers driven, scientifically based, a bit more science and pragmatism. So it was good to come from that kind of background, and also having my own training background and training of lifters, and bring that into like a professional sports environment, and to find out through working with different people and bash my head against a few people, getting work with a few people, kind of the nuances of training professional rugby players and what kind of worked, what didn't work, and it was a great time at Edinburgh. And I also was lucky enough to work with Scotland through a couple of Six Nations campaigns and an Autumn International. So it was a good 4 years, but that's basically my SSE background to this point.
Yeah, cool, and a good time to be involved in Scottish rugby that performing really well. And let's talk about your powerlifting background. So, as a lifter yourself, what do you kind of take from that experience into your S&C work with rugby and other sports?
I mean, for me, I think, many people will be able to think different, but I think it's to be an excellent S&C coach and to actually understand the process of training more than the science of training, or to understand the art and how it's actually applied. I think it's very important to take something to your limit. Now, that could be rugby, that could be lifting, it could be running, but it's taking yourself through a physical quality or to a sport and trying to take your body to the limit in some kind of aspect, because you understand what it feels like to be sore, you understand what it's like to plateau, you have a more ingrained understanding, or you have a more intuitive understanding of the training process. And certainly from younger coaches, I think that's something that's lacking massively from younger coaches I've worked with. The pragmatism tends to not be there. Whereas what I've noticed with older coaches with a maybe more of an athletic background is the pragmatism's there. And I think that's something that a lot of S&C coaches are guilty of, is not being pragmatic in the programs that you give to your athletes, how you adjust your athletes. And when I say pragmatic, you might want a player or an athlete to lift a certain load because your program says that. But then when they present with maybe a stiff groin or a stiff back, maybe rather than being like you have to, we try, rather than trying everything you can to try to get that athlete to perform at a level which you're maybe presupposing, maybe they're not ready for that level on that day. So I think being more pragmatic and having a better understanding of training as a process, to understand that if you maybe don't squat 240 for 5 today, maybe if you don't even squat, maybe if you do a trap bar deadlift or you do a single leg, or you adapt the program to allow that athlete to perform at their sport, to allow them to perform to their specific task better, you're not actually maybe going to lose the training adaptation just because someone doesn't lift something at this time. I think it's a hugely beneficial thing, and I think it makes athletes more empathetical towards you as well if you kind of understand the process of training and kind of what their body's going through. And maybe if someone's coming up and presenting with a stiff back, maybe their back's stiff, maybe it's not a fact they're trying to shirk the weight, although that definitely does happen though. but I think at the end of the day, you have to also understand that for most of these guys, this is their job as well. So you need to give them the best opportunity possible to perform on the day, because as if you're involved with professional rugby, it could be your last game at the club. It's not the easiest career in the world. So I think having that understanding rather than just being some kind of numbers-driven robot, I think is like a huge feather in the cap of an SC coach, and maybe something that doesn't get praised or recognized a lot by maybe head coaches or maybe even other SSCs or like national leads, because they tend to be in a numbers-driven environment. But the athletes and the players definitely do respect that kind of approach, and it's something that I think that's maybe a bit undervalued in the profession from my own experience.
Yeah, definitely, and certainly in rugby you need that understanding. If they've had an extremely physical game on the weekend and they come in on a Monday, they're not always going to be in that ideal position to lift, and you've got to learn to adapt your program on the fly and depend on how the athlete's responding. So that's a really good point there. And now talking, in terms of maximal strength development, obviously you're the man to ask with your powerlifting background. What are some kind of training methods you might go to? I know in the past people have looked at kind of West Side Barbell and things like that and try to take what they've used and apply it to sports.
Yeah, so I think you have to understand where West Side Barbell is coming from. So West Side Barbell is an equipped powerlifting club, so that in itself kind of skews everything. So a lot of the stuff they use, like the accommodating resistance, it kind of mimics the action of squat brief, squat suit, bench shirt. Because the strength curve of a bench shirt is directly opposed pretty much to a bench, like a normal bench press. So someone like me who's quite strong off the chest, I'm probably actually stronger at the bottom than I am at the top. Whereas in a bench shirt, universally, you're going to be stronger at the bottom just because you got the support at the bottom. So I think, and also to understand that West Side, all their lifters are drugged to the max. So it's also understanding that like the training a natural lifter and an enhanced lifter is two completely different animals. An enhanced lifter has the mechanical. So when I talk about training adaptation with strength, I like to compartmentalize it a little bit, although obviously it's not that easy. It's not compartmentalized in the real world, but when I think about things, I like to think about the mechanical factors. So mechanical factors are basically anything around endocrinology, anything around hypertrophy, kind of your work capacity, your phase potentiation with hypertrophy, however you want to think about it. So I think of it as a mechanical, and then you have the neural factor. For an enhanced lifter or a lifter who's taking steroids, the steroids take care of the mechanical factor, as you will, because their testosterone is super physiologically raised to 10 times, 20 times natural levels. So as such, they don't really need to worry about volume as it are. So they basically adapt to anything, as it were. So they're practically in a stage of newbie gains, basically. Whereas when a natural lifter is in that kind of that endocrine soup, or that kind of where they adapt to everything for maybe a year, maybe 2 years, but when a natural lifter or a natural athlete kind of gets to levels of strength where they can't just add 5 kilos every week, or they just can't add a rep every week, then you need to start looking at how you adapt your volume, how you cycle your volume, your exercise specificity, all of these kind of training becomes basically a lot more complex when someone who's natural comes towards kind of their closer, not to their physical peak, but closer to their physical peak. The window for adaptation, or the amount of things you can utilize for adaptation, gets like smaller and smaller and smaller as time goes on. Whereas for a lot of Louis guys, the window of adaptation is to up the dose and lift the most. So I think that's probably something lacking a lot, is the actual understanding of kind of what actually is going on in the background of like certain gyms or certain programs, and like for different kind of athletes, there's different ways of doing it. Because it does, like, guys will say it doesn't change much, but it's a complete game changer. And something being involved with strength sports, I've been lucky enough to see it in the flesh, with friends or whoever, and it really does. It just they're almost different species, natural versus not natural. So for obviously natural athletes, I think a lot of the Westside principles maybe work quite well in rugby or smaller team sports, because you have like a very finite window of adaptation. So you only have maybe one session two in every 2 weeks, depending. So something where you're exposing an athlete to a maximal voluntary contraction or a maximal effort, whether it's ME or RE, or to a lesser extent dynamic effort, you're providing that window of adaptation for them to get the neural benefit from the training, which at the end of the day is probably more certainly in season, is probably more to the scale we're looking to affect for an athlete. So I'm not saying for lifters it has a place, for athletes it has a place, but it's maybe not such a simple question as in like, have you used Westside? Does Westside work? Like certain some of the principles are quite good. Like I quite like for run and jumping athletes and athletes like rugby, things like box squats using bands and chains allows overload stimulus. It allows you to get a maximal contraction through an entire range rather than getting a maximal contraction at the strongest point of the movement. So yeah, there's certainly some principles I think are useful, but I think it's always good to understand where things are coming from and maybe see where they kind of interlink in a program and how it works. It's one thing that I think a lot of people are guilty of when it comes to strength training or just training in general, is to think more in that kind of siloed effect. So for me, when guys were in the gym, I would rather see them move like 60 to 80% snappy to get a nice volume load, to basically get a stimulus when it came to like big compound movements like squats and deadlifts, and wasn't necessarily too fussed with guys hitting big lifts in the gym, because you're taking away adaptation from somewhere else. So like the speed training, the units, the aerobic work, the physio, like we know these guys all have like a massive training schedule. So when I like to think about the weight training, or I try to think about the resistance training, and it's how can I build this athlete's capacity without having them show me their capacity, if that makes sense. Yeah. Rather than for instance, with Ross Ford during last season, the heaviest we were doing a mixture of like box squats, band squats, half squats. I think the heaviest he he half squatted in about a 6-week cycle, and the heaviest he half squatted was maybe about 250 for two. I don't think it was against bands. I think it was just straight weight. He maybe had a chain on it, but he had a down through luck of instance. I think he didn't get selected, or he had a rest week for Scotland, or whatever the quirk was. And his squat PB at the time was 240, and we were basically sitting there in a non-23 session on a Friday. He had a 48 hours of recovery, so you don't get these guys in this situation often. So. But basically, he fancied going for a max. I was like, yeah, sure, go for it. And he squatted 260, which is like a 20 kilo PB for him, having one not done a full squat for about 6 weeks, and two heaviest he lifted through a half squat was 250 for two. So it's to understand as well that there's an incredible soup of training and adaptation within rugby. So I think one is how can your training add and not take away from that training, and it's to maybe have because when the guy does a scrum, line out efforts, all of these are exposures to force production, time under tension. So, yeah, for me, I like to make things. I like to try and make things. Well, I like to try to understand things and then try to simplify as I understand. Don't know if I'm maybe talking in circles here, or are you following?
No, I agree. I think sometimes because when you're kind of learning different training modalities, you'll get. For hypertrophy, you need to work at this percentage for these reps, and then for strength, it's got to be over 80% for low reps. But you think that's how you prescribe load, whereas you can actually see when you've actually done it, you can see submaximal loading over time can increase max strength. And once you've done it, you realise that, and then you're not so pressured into having to lift heavy all the time.
Yeah, I think there's without question that's the fact. Don't know if you ever heard of a guy called Boris Chico. You probably heard of Boris Chico, I imagine. Yeah. So basically, his whole training philosophy, he looks at relative intensity, and he looks at volume as in terms of total reps. So the only variables he'll count within his training week. Obviously, he trains weightlifters and powerlifters, but he's famous for powerlifting. The only two training variables he will look at as meaningful are only variations of squat, deadlift, and bench press. He doesn't track volume load for rows, for lunges, lower back. They do the assistance work, but he doesn't track it. And he will look at the relative intensity. So the way he tracks relative intensity or relative load is every single rep. So rather than say you maybe take 30 reps done with an average intensity of 75, so that's your volume and your intensity. He will take every single rep. So if there's like 5 reps done at 70%, he'll take 75%, and if there's like so on and so forward, and then he'll take an average of that. And he uses that and volume as just the total number of lifts done. But the only thing he uses to track the loading of a week is just the gross number of lifts done. And he deliberately doesn't have his athletes go over 90%. The better his athletes are, the less heavy they lift. So the heaviest his athletes will go to in preparative phases will be 85, 90%. And they might do 95 or 90% for 2 sets of 2. Whereas in that training week, some of his training cycles, he do 1,000 plus lifts in a week, and he tracks from 50% to 100%. So that's 1,000 lifts between 50 and 100%. Obviously, this is how full-time powerlifters are training, but it's also the most successful strength coach on the planet as far as powerlifting goes, and he has all of his lifters. He doesn't really the intensity of effort is not really the main thing. It's the accrue, the amount of work done, and the relevant intensity of that, and as long as that's cycled correctly, and athletes are coming into competition in the correct space. That's it. Sorry, I'm getting lost here. That's kind of how he tracks his training. So to put this in perspective, he trains a lifter called Kirill Sarlichev. So Kirill Sarlichev's the current all-time bench world record holder. His bench is 335 kilos without a shirt. So the guy he took that off is a guy called Eric Spotto. So Eric Spotto is probably more of the American style of training, as in it's like they train heavy, train often, more is more kind of philosophy. So I think I might get the numbers wrong, but I think Eric Spotto benched 327 or 330, and it was difficult. Whereas when Krill benched 335, it looked like it was nothing. It looked like another 10 kilos on him. So it's kind of like the two different philosophies at the absolute extreme of one exercise, and how like lifting like high intensity, lifting to failure versus lifting sub-maximally, lifting with a lower percentage with maybe a higher volume, how they present themselves at the absolute extreme of bench press, for example. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, and I think when we look at things, so when someone's like, I think there's a real danger within strength training or within training in general and being too bound by sports science. Because if you look at it, you'll look at there's been very little meta-analysis done on dose response to strength training, but the meta-analysis that has been done would suggest that 85% is the optimal training percentage and 4 sets per workout is optimal. But then we're looking at what's the population, what's the training background. When you start delving into it, what are the quality of these studies, what was the duration of these studies, what were the extenuating factors, etc., etc., etc. If you actually like sports science, just due to the constraints of being sports science, is not the best science. So it's not like you're trying to utilize. It's not like we're looking at clinical trials here. We're looking at sports science. So I think you need to be cognizant of that when you're trying to be science led. So for me, science will point you in directions, but then it's more for you to take that idea and then apply it systematically, apply it thoroughly with your own group of athletes or with yourself or whoever it is. I don't think you can take. You can take things like hypertrophy being volume dependent, pretty much. You can definitely take that from the literature because that's pretty much as written. That's coming out left, right, and center. Velocity-based studies, intensity-based studies. Like if you control for the volume, the cross-sectional area responses seems to be more or less uniform as long as the volume load or the amount of work is sufficient to produce a hypertrophy response. So I think you can take some things like that as written, but when it comes to the actual nuance of programming or trying to work with specific populations such as rugby players, powerlifters, weightlifters, I think it's nice to have it's essential. It's not nice. It's essential to understand physiology. It's essential to understand biomechanics, and the better your understanding, the better kind of the better grounded you are in some principles. But to try and be like just science led, I think is a huge check in someone's armor. You need to be pragmatic overall when programming and dealing with like real world athletes, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think you need the skill to, be able to see how the athletes or the squad are adapting to that program, and then changing the program based on that, rather than just going, oh well, this is what this research says, they should be getting stronger. Well, if they're not, you need to change it. And you talking about the volume loads, it reminded me, I think it was Dan John saying that it doesn't matter if you're not working at 90% plus, working on close to your 1RM, so long as if you're increasing your volume load at around 80% and slowly over time increasing your 80%, your 1RM is going to increase.
Yeah, without question.
So, and especially for rugby players who don't, their competition isn't testing their 1RM, so long as they're over time increasing their physical capacity, then they're laughing. So they don't have to work maximally all the time. Obviously, there's times when it, it's beneficial, but it's just a little point there. And we were talking about, you mentioned earlier about kind of newbie gains, how you can just keep adding reps or adding weight to the bar, and then you get to that point where you can't do that anymore. What sort of progression methods do you use with your athletes?
So for me, it's when I have a newbie. So when I have someone that's new, a novice athlete, a novice lifter, a novice whatever, it's movement. It's just movement. I'm not worried about. So if I have a guy who's just started lifting weights, say for the first year, I don't care what he can lift for one. I really couldn't care less. What I'm worried about is how he executes what he is lifting. So I'd rather see someone execute an overhead squat or a snatch or a clean, whatever it is, with as close an approximation to ideal movement as possible on a regular basis, and have like a stable execution, rather than taking someone who's like, say, a 16-year-old kid who's maybe athletically gifted, is entering into an academy program or whatever the scenario is, and taking that kid from a 120 squat to a 230 squat or a 250 squat or whatever it is, because we're losing sight of the if we're 16, if we're 18, if we're 20, or if we're just entering like a training scenario, I think it's very easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. So the bigger picture is for a powerlifter, your physical peak within the sports is around 35, 36. If you're willing to take some of Daddy's cough syrup, you can take that peak right out to 45. So if a kid's starting lifting at 15, he potentially has a 20 to 30 year career of peak athletic development, not just doing it. He can do it all of his life, because powerlifting is one of them sports. Within rugby, we're looking at hitting our peak probably around 28 to 30, I would say. Obviously, I don't have any. I'm pulling this number on my bum. I don't have any data to back it up, but that's probably what we're looking at. We're probably looking at late 20s, early 30s as a physical peak within that sport. So if we have kids are starting to lift at the age of 12, 13, 14, certainly by about 15, 16 within rugby, you're definitely lifting weights. So if we're looking here, you see all these academy kids who are, they're out lifting the pros. If you have an athlete who is more developed on a physical parameter than the professionals who are, playing day in, week out, the likes of Ross Ford, who is maybe 15 preseasons under his professional preseasons under his belt. If you're taking a kid from just coming in to the academy to out lifting that professional, you should maybe question why you're doing it. It's one of those scenarios where it's just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should. So like for me, it's more about the qualitative side of things. For me, is more important at that stage. So when someone's new, so whether it's like jump training, speed training, it's cardio, it's whatever it is. It's the quality of movement, the quality of execution, the repeatability of execution over just getting a number. Because you could put me in a rugby academy. I could get them lifting stupid numbers. But what's it going to do for them as a player? Probably not a lot. Maybe they might have some like videos on YouTube that make them look cool, but like so for me, it's to think long term, and obviously the way these places are set up, that can be a very difficult philosophy to actually bring to fruition, because you have academy managers, you have head coaches. How's fucking Jimmy getting on in the gym? How's the squat doing? How's this doing? How's this test doing? Whereas it becomes about churning out numbers without, Jimmy squatted 230, but it was a bag of shit. Like it was like high. His fucking knee valgus, he had back spasms. He couldn't play for 2 weeks because, but the number went up the spreadsheet, so I'm doing a good job. Well, maybe you're doing a shit job. Maybe that's not what we should be doing. So I think that for me anyway, certainly from a powerlifting standpoint, from just a pure technical standpoint, it's about movement. The first year at least is about movement. There's so many people that come to me who have maybe are self-taught or who maybe had a coach in the past where their movement is just it's shit. And you're talking, for some people, you're talking like 2 years, 3 years to correct problems. So some lifters whose back rounds like fuck at like 50 to 60% on a deadlift. So, and then they'd be lifting for about 2 or 3 years, either under their own steam or with a coach who maybe wasn't the most diligent on that side of things. And like for the better of the lifter, we're talking, look, we need to take a side step here for 6 months. It could be 2 years. But until like this aspect of your training is correct, like you're on a one-way train to Snap City unless we sort this aspect of your movement out. And I've lost plenty of clients from just being, look, this is what we need to do, this is the reason we're doing it, and then because part lifting, you can see what you're doing, you can see the way you're lifting. All like people get answered like, oh well, so and so's lifting that, so and so's lifting this girl's got better than me, or this guy's got better than me. But it's like, yeah, but look at how they're doing it. Like give them 5 years and they won't be in the sport anymore because they'll be too injured. So for me, it's not about that the program is irrelevant, because you're in that adaptation soup. You can literally do fucking anything and they're going to get better. So if you can do anything and get better, then why not develop quality over like a quantity, or develop, if that makes sense?
Yeah. And with that in mind, do you give them at that stage a lot of variety of exercises, or do you try and stick to the basic lifts and really perfect that, or do you try and give them a kind of broad movement based, so to speak?
For an athlete, certainly variety is a very good thing to give them, because you're just adding them more tools. So if you have if you're an athlete who comes from an academy where they do Olympic lifts, they do lots of jump training, they do lots of sprint training, then all of a sudden I have all these wonderful tools I can use for ballistic strength, I can use for power development, I can use for strength development. You know, if maybe their back's a bit sore, I can go, right, try front squat, and then they can front squat through a full range with a good movement. Or like we can actually have deadlift in the program. So there's one thing we took out of the Edinburgh Strength Edition program was pretty much deadlift. There was a few guys that did it, but just from having went through a preseason where deadlift was one of the key exercises, and the amount of movement issues that most of the guys had because they hadn't had a powerlifting coach show them how to deadlift. Guys are picking up back spasms, like it's just loads of issues. So that was something I just removed from the program. And we had some of the guys who are LTIs who had deadlift in the program, but if you were playing, deadlift wasn't in the program, mainly because there was too much back being used. It was rounding, like there hadn't been enough policing of the movement. So that was an exercise we removed. But it's a fantastic exercise. It's something that you'd love to be able to utilize. But if it's not being done correctly, it can present a whole shitload of problems. So, and if you have guys who can like squat through a full range with good technique, you know, that's a way better way of developing someone's athleticism than having to use box squats and like single leg squats, because we have to kind of gimp the program because you don't have the range or you don't have the technique to squat through a full range. So if we can squat like a weightlifter, we're going to get a whole shitload of adaptation that's hugely beneficial for your vertical force production and your general athleticism. Whereas if we're only lifting through a box squat, yeah, we might get some of the vertical force production adaptations we want, but there's going to be things like VMOs going to be underdeveloped because you're not going through a full range, et cetera, et cetera. So if for an athlete, that variety of exercise is just increases their physical literature, increases their syllabus, gives the coach more tools to utilize. You can run a better program basically if they have a better skill set and better movement. So I think for an athlete, the variety is incredibly important. For a powerlifter, less so, because we're performing a closed skill. So if we're looking to become good at a closed skill, we'll utilize a variety to teach someone how to do it. So when I teach someone how to squat, I'll utilize a variety like overhead squat. We'll do goblet squats. We'll do zombie squats. We'll do front squats, pause squats, blah, 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 box squats. So if we have movement issues or we have skill issues, then variety is incredibly useful to show that person maybe an alternative way, a better way of bracing. So for example, if you have a lifter who has difficulty holding their lumbar position through a full squat, one thing we can utilize is a mixture of box squats, tempo squats, and pause squats with the correct coaching cues, and we can get a really good return out of using that variety of lifting without actually doing the movement we're trying to do. We are doing it, but we're doing it in a variety of different ways. So, but like for like a novice powerlifter, I would rather they just do squat, just do deadlift, just do bench press, but with like a very good technique and constantly trying to like hone in on the technique. And where there are like we'll use some variation, but yeah. So at that stage, if it's very easy to put numbers on powerlifting. So for a lifter who's maybe a novice, we'd say 80% of their volume will be specific to the lift they're training, and then 20% might be variety. Whereas for like an athlete, a rugby player, or a soccer player, or whatever the athletic endeavor is, it doesn't actually particularly matter what, like they can front squat, they can back squat, they can trap bar, they can box squat, they can fucking do anything really for strength development, as long as there's external resistance, as long as it's the movement quality is being coached, as long as we're trying to develop like physical literature outside of just trying to get Billy to squat 220 because great, whatever. But like it's yeah, so that's for me. That's kind of I would treat the coaching of an athlete completely differently. They're so separate from training like lifters, because they're just completely different in like what the outcomes you're trying to get.
Yeah. So let's talk. This is a question we ask all the guests on the podcast, and strictly to rugby. What do you think the biggest mistake that rugby players make when it comes to S&C?
When it comes to S&C, training too hard, without question. Without question. Anytime you do a cardio drill, you have to puke for it to be good. Anytime we're doing strength training, it's got to be heavy. It's go heavy or go home. It's definitely training too hard. Guys are like so fatigued, like all the time. They don't worry about developing capacity. They just worry about the number. So if it's a yo-yo test or it's the Bronco test or it's like a 30-meter speed time, it's just about getting better at that thing. It's a good thing as an athlete to have that mindset, have that single-minded mindset where it's like, right, here are the things that we want to focus on, and I want to get better at this. That's a great mindset, obviously. However, it's the lack of appreciation into what builds like a better body for rugby, and it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. How it's done, it's for weights like we were talking about beforehand. It's about moving like 80% and like moving it rapid and having great technique rather than moving 95% like a bag of shite. If you can move that 80% up and your capacity is coming up, and you don't really feel like you're training in the gym. You maybe come out feeling like you've done a workout. Whereas if you're constantly testing your biomechanical integrity, you're coming out with a sore knee, you're coming out with a sore back, you're coming out with a sore shoulder, then these two people are the person who's maybe looking at how things are done, and maybe this season they're not going to have the best season in the world, but 5 seasons down the line, 7 seasons down the line, bearing in mind they don't get injured, which is very fucking likely in that amount of time. But it's about building the capacity. It's about being better for next year, rather than trying to shove up numbers in the next 8 weeks because that's preseason. And and again, professional sport is kind of it's an environment where that's almost an inescapable reality because guys have like a year contract, 2-year contracts. They have to perform well, they have to do as well as possible. So within that scenario, you're pretty much you're only going to get short, sharp return kind of mindset. But for guys who are in the amateur game, there's absolutely no reason why they've got to have that same mindset.
Yeah. I like to use the term minimum effective dose, but I think sometimes people go, "Oh, that's too easy, that's pathetic," or coaches go, "Oh, we don't want that, we want maximum dose and all this sort of stuff." But if it's actually getting them better in the long run, and there's less frequent injuries and things like that, why wouldn't you do that? And it's like what you said earlier that the amount of demands they have in terms of other training, like their technical tactical training, they can't be going max effort all the time. You've got to know how to get adaptations without stressing them.
Absolutely. For me, the best kind of the best SC coach will have people hitting PBs without thinking they're training. Basically, if you're good.
Yeah. Right. So you mentioned earlier velocity-based training. I thought it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on what you think, how you've used it, or how you think it would be best employed in rugby.
So we utilise GymAware a fair bit in our program, and I thought in a scenario where we're trying to have that philosophy where maybe we're just looking at volume loads and we're looking at execution, I think it adds another variable, and it adds something that's objective where we can say, I've moved 70% at these speeds, so I know next time I come onto that, either one we can use as an objective to kind of so you'll have seen it if you've used it, where if you have maybe someone's doing 5x5 at 75%, or they're doing 6x6 at 70%, or whatever the percentage, whatever the session rep scheme is. As soon as we put like GymAware on it, or you put whatever the velocity device you're using, as soon as you put that on, all of a sudden the intention goes through the roof. Guys are they're trying to like blast the rep up there, because velocity is something that speaks to athletes, something that speaks to rugby players. Certainly some of the knuckle dragging props, they're incredibly fixated on what they're actually lifting. But some of your softer souls, shall we say, like your 9s or your 10s, who maybe don't go hell for leather in the gym, it's a nice way of like engaging that kind of athlete. Yeah. Where we can say, look, yeah, we're only lifting 120, but you're shifting that rapid. For me, it's like for an athlete, velocity training is very, very good, because it basically it puts the intention into it. And for what we want, the adaptations we want, the intention is probably more important than the actual exercise, the set, the rep, or whatever, because we're looking for more of a power or velocity-based adaptation. So intention is incredibly important for that kind of athlete, and it could be a boring sets of reps game. It could be 3x3 at 80%, but it just gives you like a number that speaks to these kind of athletes better. So I think from just like that kind of standpoint, it's incredibly useful. But also it kind of, so you'll probably know of like auto regulatory periodization, RPEs, kind of Mike Tushner sort of thing.
Yeah.
So for me, that's always been an attractive concept. However, as a coach, for me, the inaccuracies cause me issues. And like you'll get someone like Mike Tushner from Reactive Training Systems who's incredibly good at utilizing it with athletes, and you'll get some athletes who are incredibly good at utilizing it because they spend a lot of time with it. They're honest, they understand it, they can implement it. But if you like trying to understand, you can imagine going to a tight head. You have a 40-minute gym session. Okay, this is RPE. This is RPE training. So like we want you to lift up to an 8.5 out of RPE. Half these guys can't even spell their own name. Like they're not gonna implement that well. If as soon as you say right, we're going singles, they're gonna go heavy. It's just gonna happen. So what we can say is with velocity-based training, we can actually implement auto-regulatory periodization with an objective measure. So we can say, look, it's 5 sets of 5 today. Here's your velocity band. Crack on. And there's no debates. There's no interpretation. It's straightforward. As long as the device you're using is accurate, the outputs are accurate. And for me, you can apply like a fairly simple volume-based 4-week cycle, for instance. Say 6x6 week 1, week by 2 6x3, week by 4 5 sets, or week 3 5 sets of 5, week 4 like 5 sets of 2. And what we do is we just add the velocity bands that correlate roughly to the percentage we would want. And then you just let the guys work away in the bands. When a guy's feeling good, he'll go heavy. When a guy's feeling like shit, he'll go lighter. And there's no like, there's no hiding. There's no bullshit. It's like, look, I can see the number, so I know like we need to go down, or I can see the numbers going up. So for me, it's really incredibly useful for dealing with athletes, especially squads of athletes. I mean, if you're working with someone on one-on-one basis, you can see, look, that looks easy. Let's put a bit more weight on. Oh, that was a bit hard. We'll maybe take the weight down. But when you got 40 guys in the gym, and maybe you only have one SSC coach who's like good at the gym. Maybe you have like a guy who's maybe not so good. Maybe you have like 3 or 4 interns who don't really know the gym from Adam. It's just we can go, look, here are the numbers. So maybe you assign an intern or a developmental coach or whatever to a group of 3 guys. You're like, look, here's a set of reps. Here's the velocity bands. Just go and help them guys out. And all of a sudden, everything's working like clockwork within the gym. So I think for like squad-based programs or group-based programs, I think velocity-based training is like incredibly useful tool. And it's maybe something we I certainly wish we maybe used a bit more of at Edinburgh. We did utilize it, but we maybe couldn't have done as much with it as we could have done. But yeah, I think it's very useful.
Yeah, because I think when, like say, gym awares and tender units and stuff first began being used, it was more for the kind of power stuff. But more and more people are realising the benefits of using it for the strength work as well. So it's good to see that being used more. Let's talk. And normally, if I have a physio on the podcast, I'll usually ask about injury prevention. But I think it'd be good to hear from a strength coach's perspective. What are your big or your go-to things for injury prevention?
Be strong, move correctly, don't program like a retard.
Oh, lovely. No, I think you're exactly right. Obviously, strength is one of the best injury prevention tools you've got, and people kind of look for these funny balance exercises. But if you're not strong, then there's no point doing any of that.
It covers your bases. If you don't move like a retard, then you don't knee valgus when you jump. You don't knee valgus when you turn. You lift with a good posture. You do everything with a good posture. If you're strong through a full range, then you're pretty much in a good place there. And then the vast majority of injuries are... So the one thing that always broke me talking to the physiotherapist was the term load, and how it was basically a catch-all for everything under the sun. It's a loading issue. It's a loading-based injury. To a sense, like they're correct. All injuries, any overuse injury is a load issue. It's an overaccumulation or load without enough space for recovery. So that's where the not programmed like a retard comes into the equation. So if as long as things are like dealt with, so you're not going from like doing a 10K a week up to a 20K a week straight away, as long as you're looking after the variables you can, as from an SC standpoint, as long as we're making sure that we're using our GPS, we're using our heart rates, we're using our gym awares, we're controlling the variables that we have, or the objective variables we have, and programming them in a sensible manner where we're increasing things in a logical manner, we're allowing for recovery where it's appropriate. As long as we're doing that side of things well, as long as our athletes move well, and as long as our athletes are well-developed athletes, then I think you're pretty much doing all you can from an injury prevention standpoint. I really don't think that a lot of these kind of airy-fairy exercises really have a big place in the gym. I see a lot of so since kind of Kelly Starlight became a thing, so I'm currently doing a bit of coaching in the gym where the athletes take about 30 to 40 minutes to warm up to do a lifting session. And it's like, I did a seminar in a place, and they were, what's a good warm-up for squat? Go to the gym, squat the bar for 10, put some weight on, do it. There's no need for half the, the vast majority of this shit is just a waste of time. It's entertainment exercise, is what one of my colleagues said once, which I thought was a fairly accurate description of it. So you think about it, so if you think where a physiotherapist is coming from, a physiotherapist is a strength coach. They just train weak and injured people. So they have a battery of exercises. So isometrics and eccentrics are huge within physiotherapy, because an isometric is probably the first contraction you can probably do. Yeah. So that's the one thing that annoys me so much about talking to physios is eccentrics and isometrics. It's just muscle action. It's like they talk about eccentric training and concentric training like they're two different things. That it's just muscle action. It's just subsequent muscle action. So, from my standpoint, obviously, I'm dealing with people who are fit, quote unquote, who are looking to get better at something. So, for my action, it's I don't really concentrate on muscle action. But whereas, obviously, where they're coming from a point where muscle action has a huge relevance. So that's something they think about a lot. And then if you look at, so what's the physio program? 3 sets of 10 of this exercise for the next 4 weeks. Well, where's the progression? We're going to use a heavier band. Well, what's the resistance of the band? What weight is that? What's the volume load of that? So but they don't have to, because people adapt so quickly to the exercise they're doing, because they're coming from a place where they have a broken arm, they have an ACL repair, whatever it is. They're coming basically from zero to being fit enough to actually do a bit of a gym program. So for me, a lot of stuff that they do has obviously is hugely relevant, and if you ever worked inside rugby, physios are fucking super important. I'm not saying that they're useless, but it's that compartmentalization of people who train weak people or train injured people, and then they're trying to train a fit athlete or a strong athlete and use the same tool set, where they have someone who has weak glutes but can squat 3 times body weight. How the fuck are they going to squat 3 times body weight if they're weak? If the glutes are weak, it doesn't make any sense. Maybe it's weak in a certain scenario, in a certain test, but what's the actual ramifications of that in movement? So there's a very good podcast called the Physio Edge podcast. I don't know if you ever come across it.
No, I haven't.
It's ran by a group in Australia. They have some really outstanding episodes. I don't think there's that many of them. I think there's maybe 50 or 60 of them. But they had one girl on who talked about the meaningful task, which I thought was just was such a light bulb for physios. And I don't know if a lot of people have heard about it. Well, basically she'll look at. So if she's talking to me as a powerlifter, she'll be like, right, I'm getting glute pain or I have glute weakness. So they'll actually make you do a squat with a barbell and have a look at it. And then within that scenario, they might say, at this point of the movement, there's weakness, which is obviously relevant. But it's even that small thing of actually taking, rather than just right, we're going to do an injury prevention scheme where we're going to do these exercises and it's delivered shit, it's not coached. It's you have a group of guys doing band work that they don't buy into. The physio's not really coaching it. They just kind of lie around the floor, roll about a bit and do some shit exercises with bands, as opposed to actually, look, what is the application of this? Brian's saying, here's my. How many times have you seen a group of guys in the preseason go through a battery of a half a day's worth of testing, and they never fucking use the data ever? Yeah, I know. It's just union policy that they do that. It's a complete fucking waste of time. we have guys going through. You have your testing days when you come into preseason. Guys doing like doing a maximal aerobic test, and the morning before the maximal aerobic test, they're doing fucking planks to failure, they're doing trunk holds to failure, they're doing fucking hamstring tests to failure. It's just like I don't want this in my program, but I have to have it in the program because it's union policy that's in the program. It's like, what is the utility of this? Like, what is this telling us when they eventually get injured that, oh, this is baseline, so we can bring them back up to baseline because of legal issues or whatever. But
it very rarely even gets used for that.
Yeah. So it's just like, for me, it's like the idea is good, but the execution is just shit. I think it's very much in its infancy. So I think we can have things like the Nord board, which is quite a good tool. You have things like this groin squeeze test, and that are standardized, blah blah blah. So I think it will develop as it goes, and obviously we're getting much better with the external measures of load, GPS, heart rates, even RPEs to an extent. So it's definitely very much a science and development, but I think a lot of injury prevention is just down to gross program choices and how things are ran, and yeah,
definitely. No, I'm really glad I got your perspective on that. As I said, normally it's from a physio kind of view. So this another question we ask all the guests: what advice would you give to an upcoming strength coach?
Get to know people. Too many guys are worried about getting the UKSCA, or getting the NSCA, or getting a degree, getting a master's. For me, if I let's say I was to put up an intern position available, so what I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at your experience first. That's the first thing I'm going to look at. I don't really give a shit if you've got PhD, you've got fucking 5 PhDs. It makes no difference. S&C is vocational, so I'm looking at the first thing I'm looking at is your vocational experience. If you don't have any vocational experience, you're in the no pile. You could be Mike Stone, I don't give a shit. If you don't have vocational experience, I'm not interested. So the first thing, get to know people. Offer your time for free. It's the nature of the industry now. You're not going to get your masters. You're not going to get your UKSCA and then apply to a job and get the job. It's not going to happen. What you're going to have to happen is you're going to have to talk to people, you're going to have to get to know people, you're going to have to offer your time for free, and it might be a year, it might be 2 years of offering your time for free, and eventually you'll get something. There'll be an opportunity. Maybe you shadowed with someone for a couple of months, they liked you, maybe they have an entry level position, you apply for it, they see your name, and they're going to go for you chances unless you maybe get your dick out in the interview or something, do something stupid, but chances are you're probably going to get the role. If they got on with you, they liked you, you spent some time with them, you have a much better chance of getting that role than someone who's just applying through the application process. So my advice would be, if you want to be an S&C coach and you actually want to get a job, it's speak to people, intern, offer your time for free. Obviously, you still have to get your degree, you still have to get your accreditations and whatnot, because you need to know what you're talking about at some stage. You need to be able to program at some stage. But it would be first, if you actually want to do this as a profession, it's get out there, get talking to people, find somewhere and volunteer your time. And when you do volunteer your time, be early, don't be a dickhead. Like we had a guy who's a weightlifter come into us maybe 3 years ago. So we used to just like. We had maybe had one intern who was kind of there for the year, but we'd always we were a very open program. So people who maybe asked, who maybe knew me through lifting or knew Ash or whatever, would ask, can we come and spend time? It's like, well, we know what it's like to be an SSC coach, so of course you can come, you can hang out for a day, 2 days, a week, whatever. So we did this with one guy who was a weightlifter who I didn't really know through, I kind of knew of, but didn't really know him. So the first session he's in, right, the guys are doing snatch and 40 snatching 50 or 60 kilos, and he goes over to them, starts talking to them and makes a joke about them while he's lifting. He's like, oh, is that all you're snatching? And 40's like, oh, I've had 4 shoulder operations, I'm lucky I can snatch. That sort of shit, you know what I mean? Just what the fuck are you doing? Guy's a lion. Guy's got 100 casts for Scotland. Guy's a fucking legend. You're just going over there fucking jesting him because you can snatch from them. What the fuck? So basically, just don't be a dickhead was the main one. Just like try to get on, like ask questions, be helpful, be on time, and just be as helpful as you can, and just try to get on with people. Because at the end of the day, if you want to work with someone, you gotta get on with them. So we're not gonna hire someone that's a dickhead. So yeah, so that's kind of would be my advice.
Yeah, great advice. And kind of going away from the people thing, are there any books you'd recommend?
Yeah. So on strength training, the one book that I love is Science and Practice of Strength Training by Zad Arsky. Yeah. That is without question to me the best book on the topic. It's as regards information, Super Training by Mel Siff's probably got better information. However, Mel Siff, God rest his soul, is probably the worst author I've ever read. It's harder than reading like an instruction manual. It's awful. Whereas Zadarsky is actually there's a bit of narrative to it. It's still a textbook, It's not fucking Game of Thrones, but it's readable and it's digestible and the information is fantastic. Mike Stone's Science of Principles as well is a very good book. Bompa's book I assume is quite good. I don't know. I haven't really read it, but it always pops up. So for me, I think just take 2 or 3 key texts from every element. So conditioning, physiology, anatomy, strength training, speed training. Like try find what the key texts are and read at least one of those key texts. For me, that's probably you're gonna get probably more out of doing that than you will do from doing a degree, because you'll develop a better understanding of it. And then after that, if you're interested in how to develop speed, go and fucking spend some time at your athletics club. If you're interested in how to develop aerobic capacity, go spend some time at your triathlete, is that a thing? Whatever, like your endurance-based clubs. I'm not very good at endurance-based sport. Or if you want to know how to get strong, go and spend some time at your local weightlifting or your local powerlifting club, and just spend some time within the sport as well. I think that's overlooked as well. As an SC coach, you don't have to be Boris Chico. You don't have to be a world-class fucking speed coach. You don't have to be a world-class conditioning coach, but you do need to have an appreciation of all these elements. And spending some time with like an athletics club will be a USP for you. So there's not many SSE interns that are coming to me or that were coming to me having had like an athletics background or having had like even just having a training background as an intern is a huge bonus. You get lots of people who are trying to be SSE coaches but don't fucking train. It's like, how the hell are you going to coach someone to train when you don't fucking train? So it doesn't mean you have to like, be Arnold Schwarzenegger or whatever, but to have an appreciation of the training process and like getting into that, I think is I've kind of derailed a little bit here, but I think it's an important thing to do.
No, I agree 100%. Yeah. And lastly, Mark, where can people learn more about yourself?
Okay, so I run a blog called castironstrength.com. So we also offer online training services. I'm also involved in, similar to yourself, we have a rugby training website called preferrugby.com. But still very much in its infancy, but kind of my main, if you want to get most of my work, castironstrength.com is the place to be. And I've also got an Instagram and a YouTube, but you can get that all from the website.
And we'll share all links to all of those in the show notes for people to click through. But Mark, it's been great chatting to you. Really enjoyed it, and I'm sure the listeners will got tons out of that. So thank you very much for spending the time with us.
Cool, thanks very much. Very enjoyable.
Cheers, Mark.
Cheers.
So there you go. I'm sure you'll agree. Another great podcast, and thank you, Mark, for taking the time to talk to us. Loads of great information shared, and please check out Mark's blog at castironstrength.com. He's got a real good, real humorous writing style and some real good blog articles on there, so check them out. And in the meantime, please subscribe to us and give us a 5-star review, and check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. For more quality rugby strength and conditioning information, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Rugby Renegade, building machines.